People don't lose respect for you slowly. It happens in a moment. One small behavior, one subtle reaction, and everything shifts. The way they look at you changes. The way they listen changes. And the worst part? You usually don't even notice when it happens. You think you're being normal, maybe even doing the right thing. But in reality, you're sending a signal that instantly lowers how people see you. And once that perception changes, it's very hard to get it back. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Respect is not built on what you say, it's built on how certain you appear when you say it. Most people believe being liked, being agreeable, or explaining themselves clearly is what earns respect. It doesn't. In fact, the more you try to be understood, the more you start to look unsure, and people pick up on that instantly. Not consciously, but instinctively. There's a subtle shift that happens the moment you begin to seek approval through your words. Your tone changes, your energy changes, and without realizing it, you stop communicating and start convincing. That's where respect begins to fade, because the more you try to make others agree with you, the more you signal that their validation matters more than your own certainty. And once people sense that, they start to question you. Not because you're wrong, but because you don't sound like you fully believe yourself. And that single shift in perception is enough to lower your status in any social environment. To really understand this, you need to look at how people interpret behavior beneath the surface. In social dynamics, respect is not something people consciously decide to give you. It's something they feel based on subtle signals. And one of the strongest signals is certainty. Not loudness, not dominance, but quiet certainty. When someone is truly confident, they don't feel the need to over-explain, justify, or constantly prove their point. They say what needs to be said, and they stop. That pause, that lack of urgency, creates a sense of control. But when you start adding more reasons, more context, more explanations, something changes. It no longer feels like clarity, it starts to feel like compensation. And even if people can't explain it, they feel it. Because when you over-explain, you're not just sharing information, you're revealing hesitation. You're showing that you're trying to manage how you're perceived, instead of simply standing in your position. And that shifts the power dynamic immediately. The person who feels the need to explain more is often seen as the one with less authority, not because they lack intelligence, but because their behavior signals uncertainty. Think about it in real situations. In a meeting, the person who speaks briefly, clearly, and then stops is usually the one people listen to the most. There's no excess, no need to convince, just direction. Meanwhile, the person who keeps talking, trying to cover every angle, slowly loses attention. The more they speak, the less weight their words carry. The same pattern shows up in relationships. The more you explain your actions, your intentions, your decisions, the more you invite people to analyze and question you. You create space for doubt. But when you communicate clearly and stop, you create the opposite effect. There's no room for negotiation, no visible insecurity, just presence. And that presence feels strong. That's the mechanism most people never notice. It's not about saying less randomly, it's about removing the need to be validated through explanation. And once that need disappears, something shifts in how people experience you. You feel more grounded, more stable, more certain. And that certainty, more than anything else, is what earns respect without you ever having to ask for it.
Now, here is where most people lose respect without realizing it, because this behavior shows up in subtle everyday moments. First, you explain your decisions when no one asked. You say things like, "I did this because," or "I chose that since thinking it makes you clearer." But what it actually does is signal that your decision alone isn't strong enough to stand on its own. Second, the moment someone questions you, you rush to defend yourself. Instead of answering briefly, you start building a case, adding reasons, details, and justifications. And the longer you talk, the more it feels like you're trying to convince, not communicate. That shift is everything. Third, you try to prevent judgment before it even happens. You over-explain to avoid being misunderstood, to control how others see you. But ironically, that fear creates the exact impression you were trying to avoid: uncertainty. And then there's the most overlooked one. You can't sit with silence. The moment there's a pause, you jump back in, filling it with more words, more explanations, more noise. But that silence was never working against you. It was working for you. It was giving your words weight, and every time you remove it, you weaken your presence. All of these behaviors come from the same place: the need to be accepted, understood, validated. But the more you try to control how people perceive you, the more reactive you become. You adjust, you explain, you overcompensate, and people can feel that shift instantly. Not logically, but instinctively. They begin to place you lower in the social dynamic without even knowing why. Not because you lack intelligence, not because you're wrong, but because your behavior communicates hesitation. And in any environment, work, relationships, social circles, hesitation is almost always interpreted as weakness. That's how fast respect can start to disappear. Now, here's where everything starts to change. The moment you become aware of this pattern, you gain the ability to shift it. And the shift is simple, but not easy. Instead of explaining more, you start saying less. Not randomly, not artificially, but with intention. When you make a decision, you state it clearly, and then you stop. No extra layers, no unnecessary justification. At first, this will feel uncomfortable. You'll feel the urge to add more, to clarify, to make sure the other person understands or agrees. But that urge is exactly what has been working against you, because every time you give into it, you reinforce the signal of uncertainty. So instead, you let the silence exist. You allow your words to stand on their own, and that silence begins to change how people perceive you. When someone questions you, you respond, but you don't defend. You don't rush to prove your point. You simply answer, briefly and directly, and then you let it sit. That moment, that pause, carries more weight than any explanation ever could, because it shows that you're not seeking approval. You're grounded in your position. And over time, people start to feel that difference. They stop looking for cracks in what you're saying. They stop testing you, because there's nothing to grab onto. No over-explaining, no hesitation, no need to convince, just clarity. And clarity delivered without excess feels like authority. It feels stable. It feels certain. That's the shift most people never experience because they never allow themselves to sit in that discomfort long enough. But once you do, something changes in you. You become less reactive, less dependent on how others interpret you. You stop trying to manage perceptions and start owning your presence. And when that happens, people respond differently. They listen more, they question less, and respect begins to build, not because you demanded it, but because your behavior no longer gives them a reason to doubt it. At the end of the day, respect is not something you can ask for, explain into existence, or convince people to give you. It's something they feel based on how you carry yourself, especially in moments of pressure, doubt, or silence. And the truth is, the moment you start over-explaining, you make yourself negotiable. You give people room to question you, to evaluate you, to see if you're really as certain as you claim to be. But when you remove that need, when you stop trying to control how you're perceived, something shifts. You become harder to read, harder to challenge, harder to lower. Not because you're trying to dominate, but because you're no longer seeking validation. And that's where real respect begins. It's quiet, it's subtle, but it's powerful. So the next time you feel that impulse to over-explain every detail, to justify every decision, to make sure everyone agrees with you, pause. Let the silence do its job. Let your words stand on their own. Because in that moment, you're not just changing how you communicate, you're changing how people experience you. And over time, that shift becomes your identity, a presence that doesn't chase approval, doesn't react under pressure, and doesn't need to explain itself to be taken seriously. And once you reach that point, people don't just hear you differently, they respect you differently.